Kamu Hello, Adam. Hello, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Ranga, hi. I can hear you.
Great. Great. I think we have two attendees. I don't know if they are panelists or they're just attendees.
I think you should check with the panelists if they received the panelist link because they're supposed to join using the panelist link. I can't allow them now as participants because that means other people can join as well. I hope that they joined as panelists through the link.
Okay, fine.
Check with them and
let me,
then you'll tell me.
yeah. Let me send them
Uh,
WhatsApp messages. Okay.
okay.
and I'm with Afronomics Law. Thank you very much to everyone who has made time to join this exciting discussion. This is being organized by the Pan-African Lawyers Union in conjunction with their very important committee that is actually the first to host this kind of a webinar. And this committee is on so it's the Energy and Natural Resources Committee that's working in partnership with the PALU Secretariat, and they've organized this brilliant webinar that is going to be focusing on, pathways to sustainability. So the title is Pathways to Sustainability: Effective Governance of Natural Resources in Africa in the Age of Climate Change. Such a timely webinar, and we're really looking forward to engaging with you all. And we have got a very excellent presenter who is going to present. So the format of this webinar is we'll have a presentation by Professor Emese, and we'll also have some reflections from PALU President Tewodros, as well as the Pan-African Lawyers Union Chief Executive Officer, Donald Dare Don. And so I welcome you all to this very important discussion and hope that you will really get some brilliant insights, and you also share some of your comments and questions. And I'll also plead with you to really be attentive and to write like to proffer as we go forward with this presentation. We'll have a plenary where we'll open the floor to also hear your feedback, your thoughts, and your comments. And so we really look forward to hearing from you. I'm not sure if the chairperson of the committee has managed to connect with us fully. We'll have some context setting that they will give. So this context is going to be given by Claude Gasita Mtorero, and he's a practicing lawyer at Justice Bridge Chambers, currently serving as chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee at the Pan-African Lawyers Union. He possesses extensive experience and expertise in mineral resources. Mr. Gasita is a member of the African Union Technical Working Group on Mineral Resources Development and has been involved in mineral resources audits at international conferences across the Great Lakes region. His professional engagements extend to mining activities, including mineral traceability initiatives and consultancy services in the extractive sector. Counsel Gasita has advised both local and international mining companies, providing legal and strategic guidance on resource management and regulatory frameworks. He is frequently invited to speak on natural resource governance at regional and international platforms, including UN agency events, engaging diverse Francophone and Anglophone audiences. And so we'll expect that he will give us a context of the discussion that we're going to have today. What we expect from this whole discussion is to have insights on sustainable governance of extractive industries, accountability, and the lawyer's role in advancing Africa's climate. So I'll call upon Advocate Claude to speak and share with us what he thinks is very important for us to draw from this, setting the tone, the context of mineral resources governance and climate change in Africa. Advocate Claude, if you can hear me, please come through. Advocate Claude, can you hear me? I'll kindly ask Ranga to assist if Advocate Claude has managed to correct his audio.
Okay, let me give him a soft nudge on WhatsApp.
All right. So while we wait for Advocate Claude, please be sure to just register your attendance in the chat box. Just let us know where you're listening from and what you hope to gain from this very important discussion.
All right, thank you.
Hello, Advocate Claude.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Please speak. Okay, we're getting some feedback. Can you try speaking again?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Can you?
Hello.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we're still getting some feedback.
Cutting edge moderation and introductory remarks. Please keep the momentum as we will be playing the key role in this session. So, good evening, distinguished participants, colleagues across Africa and beyond. My name is Claude Agasita. I'm a lawyer and currently serve as the chair of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee at the Pan-African Lawyers Union. It's my great honor to welcome you to this timely and strategic webinar organized by the committee in collaboration with the Pan-African Lawyers Secretariat. And I thank you for your support. So broadly, but briefly speaking, as many of us know, Africa is immensely blessed with natural resources, making it sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, Advocate Claude, please go on.
Okay, yes. Making it as one of the richest regions in terms of natural resources wealth. Building on this foundation, the continent has been strategically repositioning itself economically by leveraging these resources through diversionary framework, including but not limited to the African Union Agenda 2063, the African Union Commodity Strategy as the flagship of the agenda, and the African Union Continental Free Trade Area, the African Continental Free Trade Area, in particular, the African Mining Vision and its associated instrument adopted by the African Union, such as the African Mineral Governance Framework, African Minerals and Resources Center Policy Analysis, and Research Center AMREC Path, and so on and so forth. The overarching of this objective of this instrument is to optimize the African resources governance for the benefit of Africa and the Africans. Despite this ambitious framework and efforts made, the climate change remains a pressing challenge. It's unfortunate. As a global environmental pressure intensifies, the Africa urgently needs robust legal and policy framework to ensure its natural resources are managed responsibly, equitably, in the way that secure both current and the future generations to come. Therefore, recognizing that the legal profession plays a critical and cross-cutting role in this transformative journey, hence this webinar will explore the legal dimensions of natural resources governance in Africa by eliminating the complex legal landscape surrounding natural resources governance in Africa. It will highlight the critical role of lawyers in policy, strengthening the legal system, promoting accountability, and building capacity among legal professionals, and support African sustainable development in the age of climate change. In the light of this background, that we are truly privileged today to host a distinguished speaker, Professor Ngobo Emes. She got an ample experience in high-level teaching and research. I myself was lucky to be taught by her on the mineral contract and negotiation. Professor Ngobo, she has a very long and strong CV, but for the sake of time, I'll just be skipping. She's a distinguished scholar in environmental and energy law, currently serving as the head of a department of law and criminology at Brits Wales University in the United Kingdom. She has held several senior academic leadership, including, but not limited, the director of learning and teaching at University of Brantford, head of school, and interim director and faculty, among many others. Fortunately, in 2020, she was recognized as one of the few Black female professors in the United Kingdom through the Phenomenal Women Project. I think this is an achievement that we must applaud and take pride in as Africans. Professor Ngobo is an active researcher within and with international reputation in environmental and energy law, particularly within the context of the extractive sector in Africa. She gives the keynotes across the world, including the UN event. Her expertise on this subject has been brought and to bear with the work of various region organizations, including United Nations Economic for Africa, UDEP, on mineral law and policy negotiations in Africa. The African Capacity Building Foundation on Natural Resources Governance Management, Oxfam Mozambique on climate change policy, and African Community Practice Management Development, Result Governance on Social Responsibility in Natural Resources Exploitation. She was a member of international team that produced a draft declaration on climate change and human rights on behalf of the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights and Environment to feed into the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris 2015, the Paris Agreement under the UN Framework Convention in Climate. I think that those involved in environmental law know very well the convention, the Paris Convention. Professor Emes obtained her PhD from the University of Dundee in the UK, Center of Energy, Petroleum, Mineral, and Policy. She graduated from the first class from Nigeria Law School and a distinction from the University of Wales, Cardiff. She is a former, prior to her academic career, she practiced as a barrister and solicitor in Nigeria. With that context in mind, it is now my pleasure to invite the keynote speaker, Professor Ngobo, to take floor and share her insight. Professor, over to you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Advocate Claude, for that context setting. I think at this point we'll have the PALU Economic Governance Officer, Rangarai Chikoa, to give some short remarks on the presentation by Professor Ngobo Emes. Ranga, please come through.
Okay, thank you, Samantha, and welcome everyone. Webinar, where we have an important topic that we need to discuss. You forgive me my connection is unstable. So for better connectivity, I'm gonna keep my camera off. So as Africa, we stand at a critical crossroads where the governance of mineral resources intersects with urgent challenges of climate change. We all know that minerals are the backbone of many of our African countries, and they are also the foundation of green technologies. We are talking about lithium for batteries, cobalt for electric vehicles. We are talking about rare earth for wind turbines, etc. But you also find out that the extraction and processing of these minerals, it often comes with high environmental costs. When we talk about mineral resource governance, it's also important to highlight or to mention the Africa Mining Vision, which is, if you may allow me to say, the Bible when it comes to mineral resource governance, because it provides, the things that Africa needs to do to ensure that there is effective governance of mineral resources and countries are in a position to derive commensurate benefits from the extraction of their resources. So when we talk about effective governance, it's not just about managing those resources, but it's also about ensuring that there is transparency and accountability, and there's also sustainability. So we must also adopt policies that minimize ecological damage. We should have policies that also respect community rights, policies that promote fair and benefit sharing. At the same time, we can also not ignore the carbon footprint of mining operations. Decarbonizing of the mining sector, embracing renewable energy, fostering circular economies are no longer an option. So these are issues that are very, imperative. So climate change demands a just transition. So this means balancing the global climate goals with the livelihoods of the communities that depend on mining. So this means that there should be ethical supply chains, responsible sourcing, so that the minerals pouring the clean energy, it doesn't not perpetuate future harm. So we should be committed to governance frameworks that align resource management with climate resilience. And together, it is important that we transform mineral wealth into a driver of sustainable development and a cornerstone of the fight against climate change. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you very much, Ranga, for those remarks. Indeed, the Africa Mining Vision is, the go-to when you're talking about mineral resource governance in Africa. And the whole idea is to ensure that Africa is able to, develop the continent to the extent that we wish, as according to Agenda 2063. So we've really heard from Advocate Claude when he was setting the scene, and we've heard from the PALU Economic Governance Officer, Ranga, who was also just sharing some brief remarks as we also wait to see if Professor Emese will be able to join us. But I understand we also have a bit of reflections that are supposed to be delivered by the CEO of PALU, Don, on behalf of President Teodros Tulu. President Teodros Tulu is the Pan-African Lawyers Union president, and so unfortunately he could not join us for this discussion, but he was kind enough to share his reflections with Don. So please, Don, if you can come through.
Yes, before she takes floor, sorry for interrupting you. Professor is not joining us this time. She'll be joining because she's having another meeting. Okay.
That's all right. Thank you very much, Advocate Claude. Don, please come through with PALU President Teodros's remarks and reflections.
I'm very sorry, Samantha. This is coming as a bit of an ambush. We thought that the professor would be here by now for her keynote, and mine was mostly to give a word of thanks. The president of PALU was appreciating the work of the Energy and Natural Resources Law Committee in terms of trying to set up a viable practice community around environment law and climate change law in the continent at this time. As you may know, one of the initiatives, and again, I'd like to open this up to the plenary, one of the initiatives that PALU has taken in the course of this year is working with the African Climate Platform, which brings together over 100 civil society organizations of different kinds, community-based organizations, national level organizations, continental and international organizations invested in climate change and climate justice and environmental law. We have requested an advisory opinion from the African Court on Human and People's Rights on the obligations of states, principally African states, on climate change and responding to issues of climate change from a rights-based perspective, based on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and other elements of international human rights law that binds the African countries. So that is one of the major contributions that we thought we could make at this time. This, of course, comes in the backdrop of similar advisory opinions that have been issued in the course of this year and last by the International Tribunal on the Law of the Sea clause, by the International Court of Justice, and by our sister court, the Inter-American Court on Human and People's Rights. And we felt that it was a time of Africa and to build on African international human rights law and African international law generally, and really lay out the obligations of our states to be much more robust in terms of what they do in country, but also what they do in terms of negotiations at the global level, so that it's obligation-based rather than so it is context that we thought that let's have a discussion, hopefully with the help of the professor, but even if not amongst ourselves, on what governance looks like, natural resource governance looks like in the age of climate change, and how our governments especially can help
Don, are we losing you?
for the world that we're already living in terms of feeling the effects of climate change. So it was in this context that the president, by members present and by stakeholders and friends of PALU present, and then hopefully an exhortation to urge them to participate in the court process, especially by filing their own observations. And the observations can include any best practices that
Yeah, we're having a hard time hearing Don V, and I think it's just dropped off. But yeah, Don was just giving some short reflections on behalf of President Tuadros, who is the PALU president. We hope Don will be able to join us briefly, but I think we could open this up for plenary and hear from the audience, what they're thinking as well when we're talking about this very important topic. And again, it's pathways to sustainability, effective governance of natural resources in Africa in the age of climate change. And I think it's important for us to really emphasize on, the part where it reads in the age of climate change. And I know we're also having COP30 discussions at the moment. And so it's really important for us as the African continent to reflect on, our natural resource governance. Is it working for us? I mean, we're also talking about critical minerals, right, around this time. And so what does it really mean? And I think Don also asked a very important question when he was talking about how we would, want this discussion to go. He said what natural governance looks like. Like, we're supposed to be talking about what natural governance looks like for Africa. What are we thinking in our different spaces? And more importantly, what do we think could be the role of lawyers in this whole discussion? So please do feel free to, raise your hand and, just take the mic, or if you would like, please also just make use of the chat box. We really hope to hear from you, your thoughts, your reflections, your questions even. We will try to address them. I think we mentioned, the good prof will not be able to join us, unfortunately, but we do have, a number of experts in the room who will be able to take some of your questions. And we also do have, the chairperson for the Energy and Natural Resources. And so I'll open the floor now. Please do request for the mic, or please make use of the chat box. Looking for hands. It also could be just an insight or something that has sparked interest in all of the remarks we've been having so far. I see Don is back. Don, can you hear us?
Yes, I'm in Nairobi and with very bad internet suddenly.
So sorry. But we had lost you right before. I think you were getting into a point. I'm not sure if you'd want to go on with that, or...
No, I think I was more or less done. It was just inviting into the conversation also the fact that there's a pending request. And one of the things that we'll be urging as a call to action is also on encouraging members present to also engage their own governments and to make sure that their governments, come on board and make observations around the issues to do with climate change and how they're handling them within the country in terms of law, policy, programs, and budgets, and the challenges that they're facing, if any, and any questions that they myself want to put to the court. And at the same time, we're encouraging civil society organizations, academic institutions, and so on, to also consider joining the ongoing case, the ongoing request as amici curiae, or even as experts. We're able to give expert evidence to the court. And one of the things that we're specifically looking at are questions of the science, especially African done and African-based science, what our own science is researching, scientists researching, what is the evidence that they're getting in terms of an evidence-based management of the climate crisis on the continent and issues of just transition on the continent. So it was basically that this is open, and part of what we can even make an offer to participants present is if they have questions or comments on the ongoing request, then that's one of the things that we can discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Don, and thank you very much for sharing that important information on the ongoing request. And like he has said, this is a very open call, so please do reach out to the Pan-African Lawyers Union if you would like to join them as a friend of the court to give evidence on these issues. I'm still requesting for hands for people who might have questions or insights to share, really, or even comments on what they think is important for this discussion that we're having today. It could be in relation to the topic itself and the remarks that were given by the chair, Advocate Claude, or by the PALU Economic Governance Officer, Ranga, but as well as, all the information that Don has shared with us. In the event you can't speak, please do use the chat box. Happy to read on your behalf. All right. Okay. June, I understand we have June from the Pan-African Lawyers Union. June, Cynthia, if you could share a little bit more on the advisory opinion that Don was just speaking to us about. June, if you can hear me, please come through.
Yes, Samantha. I said something.
Yes, Advocate Claude.
Hello.
Please go.
Thank you very much. I think I still in small box because they don't yet have a general idea on the topic. But I'm sure that once the main speaker presents from the presentation and from what Mr. Don has raised, I think that department will have more ideas and questions to comment to on the topic. Otherwise, I think that they are still a little bit to raise the question. That's why I think that that's why they're keeping quiet a little bit. Otherwise, I'm sure that after presentation, and what Donna said, participant will have something to say.
Indeed, thank you very much, Advocate Claude. Yeah, which is why I was saying maybe we could draw from the insights shared by Ranga, yourself, and Don. But I see we do have a question in the chat box, and there is a question.
My hand is up.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, thank you. So let me start with the chat box and then come to you, Robert. Thank you very much for that. So we have a question in the chat box, and it says, are there model statutes and regulations and standards for countries to adopt and follow for, I think they wanted to say each type of extractive industry, EC type of extractive industry, I'm not sure, but we'll come to that. I hope the chair, Advocate Claude, you have taken note of that and will be able to proffer some information with regards to that question. But please do come through, Robert, and thank you very much for raising your hand.
Robert from Gaborone, Botswana. Basically work for an organization called Botswana Watch. It's an entity which exists to promote issues of transparency and accountability. I have two lame questions. The first one will be directed to the advocate. That most of the lawyers, they are part and parcel of the negotiation team when the states negotiates the mining contracts with the mining companies. So I think what I've always wanted to understand is when this happens, the lawyers, do they negotiate with good faith? Do they represent the communities, or do they have the interest of the communities they negotiate, or they're just looking to make a good deal? I'm not saying this in a bad faith. I just want to understand exactly how our negotiations are happening. Lastly, just that I think we make a lot of reference to the African mining vision, this continental document, but most of our African countries, they have not really domesticated in the different jurisdictions. Thank you so much. Those are just my few questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that. For those two very important questions. I'll ask Advocate Claude to respond to the first about the negotiations and the role of lawyers there, and PALU governance, Economic Governance Officer Ranga to respond to the one on the Africa Mining Vision. So, Advocate, please go forward and also respond to the one that I had read from the chat box.
All right, thank you very much, Madam. This is actually a very interesting question on mineral contract negotiation that have been a very complicated issue at even the African level. So it's even one of our mission as the committee to train our lawyers members on contract negotiation, because it's a very, very complicated field that many of our lawyers are just now. So we are trying to partner with some experienced organization and institution that have been working on extractive industry much longer to train our lawyers, especially in contract negotiation. So in terms coming to his question, I think that the negotiation depends on of lawyers. It depends on the side that lawyer is negotiating for. Either lawyer negotiates on behalf of the government. At that time, I think lawyers will try to argument in the way that the contract benefits the government. But if is negotiating on behalf of the company, the private company, the mining company, the same, vice versa. But we need to have professional skills in terms of negotiating mineral contract. We are not yet able, according to. We need to be trained professionally and to get enough skill in terms of negotiating contract mineral contract. Otherwise, negotiation depends on the side that you are negotiating. If you are from the government, you try to protect your government, your client. I mean, if you are negotiating on the side of company, we be trying to negotiate on behalf of the benefit and the interests of the company. That's what we can say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Claude. Ranga, would you take the one on the Africa Mining Vision?
Okay, thanks, Samantha. So on little uptake of the mining vision, what we have seen is that one, many of our African countries, they have weak institutional and governance capacity. Like many of our nations, they lack, strong institutions, that are geared to domesticate the Africa mining vision principles into national laws and policies. And in some countries, you will notice that the governance systems, they are fragmented. There's poor coordination between, various ministries and agencies, that relate to mining. For example, there could be a weak, coordination between the Ministry of Finance, which is responsible for taxing the sector, and the actual, Ministry of Mines and Minerals. And then secondly, there is limited political will. Because remember, when we talk about policy, when we talk about implementation, it's politics. It's politics that get things done. So if the political will is not there, then it means implementation also, will be problematic. And then another interesting point is that many of our African countries, they are expecting, to get financial benefits within a short term, of course, of which in the mining sector that might not be, possible. So it's important that countries, need to understand that some of these benefits from the mining sector, they take time, to get. So they really need to invest. And then another challenge is also financial and technical constraints. Because remember, policy also means resources. You would need resources to implement your policies, setting up proper institutions. In those institutions, they would need resources. You would need human capital, people would need money, salaries, etc. You would need, the technology, etc. For example, geological surveys, etc. So all those things, they require resources. So many of our African countries are not willing, to devote resources, towards the implementation of the Africa Mining Vision. Yeah, in a nutshell, I think I'll say that. Then there was also a question, Samantha, on the chat with regards to model statutes, regulations, standards, etc. So there are some standards. Okay, let me start with statutes. There are some model statutes and legal frameworks. For example, if you look at organizations such as Natural Resources Governance Institute, they actually provide guidance on structuring extractive industry laws, and these laws, they include licensing, fiscal regimes, environmental management, community engagement, etc. Then we also have the World Bank. They also do have, they offer actually what they call best practice templates, for countries new to resources development, including fiscal policy, environmental safeguards, transparency, etc. Then when it comes to oil and gas, we also have, model law, for example, the Lex Petrolia, which is a transnational petroleum law. Then with regards to standards, there are a number of international standards with regards to, mineral resources. For example, we have the AET, which focuses on disclosure of licenses, production, revenue flows, beneficial ownership, etc. And even on the African continent, we have the Africa Mining Vision that I spoke about. And the Africa Mining Vision, it has, other supporting frameworks, that if countries, adopt those frameworks, they are in a position to improve, or their mining laws. Of course, some of these standards, they are not specific, to a certain mineral, but they just, give a broader, overview of what countries need to do. So it is upon the countries now to adopt what is relevant to their context and to specific minerals that they have. Then in terms of standards, we also have the Global Mining Sustainability Standards. It includes frameworks like the International Council on Mining and Metals Principles, the OECD due diligence guidance, even the United Nations Environmental Program, Mineral Resource Governance Guidelines, etc. They all, address environmental, social impact, and human rights, and also climate considerations. Then, in terms of climate, we do have, a number of frameworks. For example, we have the UN Framework on Classification of Resources, and the UN Resources Management System, the critical minerals governance principles. These are most recent, from the UN, and we have various protocols, either at the international or at the regional or national, that speak to issues of mineral resource governance and climate. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ranga, for that detailed response and also for addressing the question that we had in the chat box. Yes, do we have any other hand or contribution or comment? Again, either in the chat box or in Or you could raise your hand and we could give you the floor. I'm looking and I don't see hands. Yes, thank you very much for those questions, and thank you to Advocate Claude and Aranga for responding to. Oh, we do have a hand. Thank you very much, George. Please come through.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is George calling in from Nairobi. And I have somewhere between a question and a comment. And mine is to just raise a discussion on how we can harmonize our extractive industry regulations and not necessarily laws, because I've realized that we have very good laws in most African countries, but we don't have established industry customs and standards. So is there a way we can harmonize them and guide the industry towards a particular route? Because we have our extractive industries are mostly similar, apart from maybe South Africa. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. We'll have it responded to in a second. We'll also have another hand from Leroy. Leroy, please come through.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, I know a little teeny weeny bit about the subject, but not very much. So please excuse me if this is a silly question. But the question that I have is whether there can be developed a set of model contracts that are annotated. In a lot of commercial contexts, the basic structure of a commercial agreement is fairly well known. You know, you have representations, you have covenants, positive covenants, negative covenants, and similar kinds of provisions in all these agreements. Now, the annotations would come in to discuss what each of the provisions mean. And then this may get to be a very long document, but it could incorporate some of these, standards and regulations that we've been hearing about as attachments or as, quote, boilerplate that every contract would have to comply with. I hope that that was not too obtuse, but that's what I had to say.
All right. Thank you very much, Leroy, for that question, suggestion, a bit of both. So maybe I will refer these to Ranga. Ranga, do you want to come in? The first on how we can harmonize the regulations and at least have customs and standards in the extractive industry, and the other on the idea of having module contracts in this extractive industry.
Okay, thanks, Samantha. Yes, it's possible to harmonize, our laws, and that's the reason why we have Africa Mining Vision. Because if you look at mineral resource governance in Africa, our challenges, they are similar, and having a document such as the Africa Mining Vision, it helps in harmonizing our laws. Of course, some of the things might not apply to other countries, but at least the Africa Mining Vision, it provides a standard, that will ensure that our laws are almost similar, given that the challenges that we are facing, the same. For example, when you talk about transparency, it's the same in all the countries, we also have other strategies. For example, the African Green Mineral Strategy. Remember, we are also talking of, the surge in demand for green minerals, etc. And most of these minerals that are needed, they are found in Africa. So it's important that, we use our own, frameworks to ensure that our laws, are harmonized. Even at the regional economic communities level, we do have, some protocols. For example, in ECOWAS, they have the ECOWAS Mining Directive, and the SADC harmonization framework, etc. So all these, they set, some principles for member states to standardize, things like licensing, fiscal regimes, and environmental, standards. We also have other standards such as the Pan-African Resource Reporting Code, the African Mineral and Energy Resource Classification System, etc. This also, provides opportunities for uniform resource reporting and evaluation across countries. So once we harmonize our laws, we're in a position to speak together in one language and reap more benefits, from the extraction of our resources. Then, with regards to the issue of contracts, so this is a very important topic because the devil is in the details. When we say Africa is not benefiting from the extraction of its resources, remember all the transactions that are happening, all the mining that happens, it starts with the contract. Everything is set in the contract. So if we get it wrong at the contract level, then we are doomed because we need to understand that contracts, they supersede national laws. So if we have our acts of parliament saying on the extraction of our resources, laws on taxation of the mining sector, VAT, royalties, etc., those laws, they are superseded by the contracts because when the investors come, they will negotiate for tax incentives. For example, in many of our countries, the corporate income tax, it ranges between 20 and 30%. So when a mining company comes now, they negotiate for a tax rate that is below what is stipulated in our Acts of Parliament. They could negotiate for a 10% rate, and then they enjoy the benefits. And that is stipulated in the contract. So once the contract is signed, you will stick to the contract regardless of what your Acts of Parliament say. So it's important that we focus on the contracts. We need to understand the provisions in the contracts. That was on the issues of tax, even on issues of revenue sharing mechanism, because the mining communities that host the mining companies, they need to benefit. The local authorities, they need to benefit. The central government, they need to benefit. So all those issues, they should be stipulated within the contracts, because once the contract is signed, what is in the contract is that which is followed. The contracts then become binding. Even on issues of human rights, it's important that we know about all these things, all the things that we want from the mining sector, all the issues, have to be reflected in the contracts, and we need to ensure that these contracts are also publicly available. I would say that as Africa, given that we do have resources, and some of the contracts that are there are not in our favor, and we need to speak with one voice, given that our challenges are the same. I think it's time that we have a model contract that we can use as Africa as a whole. But however, depending with various country contexts, that contract, may be tweaked to reflect, those specific issues within a specific country. But what is important is to understand that we are not benefiting from the extraction of our resources. And we need to know how we should, ensure that we benefit, and those issues should then be reflected in the contracts. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ranga, for that elaborate answer. I note there's a hand from Don, and after Don, I'll read the. So I think it's a comment and a question altogether by Bright. So please, Don, come through.
Thank you. Thank you, Samantha. Mine is just to add on to what Rangaraya said, which I totally agree with. And to say that one thing that has not been mentioned is that in terms of model laws, the Pan-African Parliament last year in July also adopted a model law on climate change, and which was supposed to provide for member states a template for member states that might want to enact a specific climate change legislation. So it provides guidance for national legislation if you want to make one. It advocates for a comprehensive framework in the national legislation that will talk about policy, coordination, institutional arrangements, climate finance mechanisms, carbon markets and the challenges with carbon trading, and also the importance of public participation. That's one. Then even adding on to the question made or the comment made by both Lira Wilson and George King and so on, is to know that African countries have an additional resource known as the African Legal Support Facility, ALSF, which is based in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. It is housed by the African Development Bank, although it is independent of the African Development Bank. And it's like an international corporate law firm for African governments that has a lot of capacity that helps states when they're negotiating in the extractive industry, minerals, oil, and gas, or negotiating in huge infrastructure contracts and PPP. So they can actually come for free and help you negotiate, help you arrive at the best contracts, use the best possible templates. And should disputes arise, they can also represent our governments free of charge, be it in arbitration or be it in litigation and so on. And part of the challenge we face is that many times when our governments face challenges here, they need strength in order to negotiate the best contracts for their countries, or they need strength when they've been sued. And a lot of the litigation actually is arbitration being carried out by ICSID, the International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. You find that you are not sure that they're fully and adequately presented. You find that a company based in the global north has sued an African government. It is being represented by lawyers from the global north. The African government itself is being represented by lawyers from the global north. The arbitrators come from the global north. So you are not sure whether the needs and interests and the context of Africa is fully provided there. So ALSF exists to provide this kind of service to governments, and I think it is important to constantly remind them. So we've got the best possible legal advice and assistance at all stages of the extractive industry spectrum. I think the other point that had been raised earlier in the Q&A, I'm not right moment speaking to questions that may have come after I looked, was I think raised by Bright, and that's a question of implementation. And Bright points out, quite rightly so, that in a number of these issues, our governments actually do have good constitutional and legal frameworks, or at least that cover the basic principles. And it's just that these are not implemented. So I think the challenge to us as citizens, first and foremost, and then for those of us who are lawyers, as lawyers, and those who are other professionals, as other professionals, engineers, accountants, bankers, and so on, is to see how to organize ourselves to push for proper implementation, to insist at the national level that the governments follow the laws and the policies and the visions, Vision 2030, Vision 2050, and so on, when engaging in negotiation and implementation. And to remember that there are rules for other actors. There's a big role for Parliament, so we must really organize ourselves to be in constant conversation with Parliament, especially in its oversight role. But to remember that in most of our constitutions across the continent, all international agreements have to be ratified by Parliament. So it's not enough for the executive arm of government to go and enter a deal, with some company to mine some resource. And right now there's this huge race on the continent on critical minerals, whatever agreement that the government proposes, it must go to Parliament for ratification. And if it doesn't go to Parliament for ratification, then it is not valid. And if it is not valid, then it is odious debt. And that for even international partners of Africa, we have to remind them that, because that is the situation. So they know the law exists and they are getting competent legal advice when they're entering into arrangements with the African governments. And if they don't follow the existing law, then they can't come to us, the citizens, to pay upon this. And of course, there's also a role for the judiciary and for litigation. So we are urging for more robust, more proactive, and more innovative litigation, especially by African citizens, to ensure that laws and policies are fully followed. So for instance, like for PALU, we do have a case now against the government of South Sudan, which purported to enter into a huge resource-backed loan on the sidelines of COP25 in Dubai with some shadowy Dubai company that's related to the royal family, called Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Special Projects, where literally the government entered into a 13.2 billion euro loan, which more or less mortgages all known remaining oil reserves in South Sudan to this company. And of course, they didn't follow the public finance management rules. It didn't go through the ministerial committee within the cabinet, and it wasn't taken to parliament. And we've sued the government of South Sudan before the East African Court of Justice and said this is odious debt. And we want the court to declare that this is odious debt that the people of South Sudan are not entitled to pay. So President Salva Kiir and the people with whom he ate the money are the ones to pay for it. So there's a role for citizens to mobilize much more robustly, to engage parliaments much more proactively, and where necessary, to use litigation as a tool to really push that there's implementation of the constitutions and the laws and the rules that we actually already have, many of which are quite good. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Don, for highlighting the role of those institutions. You mentioned the Pan-African Parliament and the ALSF. And also, I think we note there we have Leonard, who is agreeing with you and says there's a need to reform our extractive industry legal framework to achieve both environmental and economic benefits from our natural resources. We really are looking forward to also hearing how the case against, South Sudan goes as you move forward. And thank you very much for also responding to the comments made there by Bright. I'm not sure if we have a new hand from Leroy or there's an old hand. Leroy, if you can confirm.
Can I add something short on what have been said by my colleagues and on just what have been done at the African Union level in terms of model and having a benchmark of contracts. We have been developing what's called African Union model development, and there was part to this to the team. So we have been thinking even on how to establish the arbitral tribunal in Africa, within Africa. If the investment in Africa, we don't need to go to Washington or Paris because it costs African countries when they go there to pay lawyers and to go there and so on. Why not? We can't have an arbitral or tribunal within Africa because investment is within Africa. When the dispute arises, instead of going outside Africa, we go to handle our dispute to our tribunal within Africa. That's what I've been thinking, but some challenges are still there, political and so on. But we have been thinking and to include in the model. Other things that we are thinking about is that to have the model to add on what the LSF have been doing on behalf of the government, the African government. We have been developing a modulo, a standard modulo that once the modulo is done and once ratified by the African Union member state, it will be covering a couple of questions that have been raised here from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Claude, for sharing that. I think Leroy will be our last hand. Please come through, Leroy.
Switch me on. Oh, hello? Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. I just wanted to comment on something that I hope that Ranga said, and which Don I think highlighted. and that is, I think that Ranga's statement was a little too broad, which was that the contract governs, that, forget about the laws, that the contract will govern. So my initial reaction to that was, as long as it doesn't violate public policy. And one of the things that Don pointed out in his statements with respect to the South Sudan contract is that even though you had the contract, it could not control because it violated public policy. That's the only statement I want to make.
Thank you very much, Larry, for sharing your thoughts on that. I think we've come to the end of this webinar, and again would like to thank you all for joining, but I'll hand over to Don to do the official closing remarks and wrap up. Don, please come through.
The professor has joined. The professor has joined.
Hi, Advocate Claude.
The professor Ms. had joined.
Okay, so you would like us to proceed in which?
Yeah,
Please,
I think we can proceed before, yes. She has joined, huh?
Okay, so you're proposing.
I think she can make her presentation as because she had promised to join us later.
All right, so I'll leave you to make the official welcome remarks for her as she moved.
Sorry?
Please go ahead and introduce her.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Ngobo, for joining us. Yeah, I have already introduced her before she comes, but allow me to introduce again just allow her to present her. So Professor is one of the seasoned experts in terms of extractive industry. She's a distinguished scholar in environmental and energy law, currently serving as head of the Department of Law and Criminology at Bracewells University in the United Kingdom. He held several senior leadership that I don't want to come back on that. And in 2020, she was recognized as one of the few Black female professors in the UK through the Phenomenal Women Project. As I said, I think that this is an achievement that we could applaud and take pride in as Africans. Professor is an active researcher and with international reputation in environmental and energy law, particularly within the context of African extractive industry sector. And she always gives the keynote across the world, including the UN event. She got her PhD from the Dundee University in mineral law and policy. I think without further ado, Professor, you can take the floor and share your insight. Professor, over to you, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry. I think there seems to have been some misunderstanding here because I was hearing closing. I had understood that I was to join this at 1 o'clock today, UK time. Did we get that wrong? Hello?
Ranga, please respond.
But anyway, there seems to have been, because I can see you are rounding up, and when as I sat there listening to the last discussions. So if there's been a mix-up, I sincerely apologize. I'm not quite sure what's happened there. My understanding was to join at 1 o'clock today. But in terms of the topic, and thank you very much for being here, and thank you for taking the time to join. I had the opportunity of listening to some of the discussions that were ongoing when I joined in the background. And so I'll share my slide, but I probably won't speak to all of it. I kind of go in the flow of some of the conversations that had been ongoing. So just in terms of our topic today, I was asked to speak on pathways to sustainability, governance of natural resources in Africa in the age of climate change. A number of things, if you like, are the focus for me from this topic. The first is the question of sustainability, the idea that the development, the production of natural resources in Africa has to be done in a sustainable manner. The other question, of course, is the big question around governance, which has been a challenge for us in Africa for some time around natural resources. And then the new entrant into the field is climate change, and how climate change impacts or not on that broad thematic question that we have. Now, I know that everybody who is here today understands that Africa is richly endowed with natural resources, that our historical relationship with these resources is steeped in the colonial legacy. And I'll sort of explain a little bit around that as I move forward. The other key thing that has dominated our discourse around natural resources is the weakness of our institutions, the fragmentation of our regulatory frameworks, particularly when we juxtapose this with the wider challenges of regulating the players in this, which are usually large multinationals, although we also have the challenge or the issues around artisanal mining that we also have to engage with. Another big question that we have to grapple with in that port is the question of revenue management as part of our natural resources governance. And climate change kind of steps in to sort of create even further tensions for us in that playing field. So these are some of the issues that I'm going to sort of try and unpack briefly as I discuss today. As I said, I kind of note where we are in the program. So I'm kind of going to just talk through a few things, and hopefully we can have a fruitful conversation. Human and parcel of the causes of climate change. We also know that it affects all aspects of human behavior, includes food, water, health, peace. But it has particular implications for the resources sector. And why do we say that? Because when we say that climate change is implicated in man-made activities, one big area that is implicated is fossil fuels, oil and gas, coal, that powers our energy systems. What that means is that climate change has an implication for the world in terms of the environmental challenges. But for states, countries like ours, that are awash with minerals like Africa, for revenue. In other words, if climate change is happening and we need to respond to climate change, and responding to climate change in the context of the global discourse around climate activity is about two issues: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation of greening, of the environment. And oil, minerals are direct, especially, are also part of the future in terms of how we manage the green energy or the green economy that we think about. So when we think about the value of resources to Africa, from the purview of minerals or natural resources, I'm focusing on minerals because that's what I was told the focus of this will be here. Of course, that natural resources will include our waters, agri-resources, and the rest. But the focus here is on mineral resources, oil, and solid minerals. Now, Africa produces about 5.5% of minerals globally, and that's what, about 406 billion. Now, we may think that's a small fraction, but if you look at the breakdown, you will find that that's actually quite significant for our continent, especially when we compare the proportion or the revenues from mineral resources to our overall GDP or foreign income. Well, the monies that we get from our foreign exports mainly from mineral resources, although in the real economy, that's just a small fraction because it's powered more or less by the informal. So thinking about this, therefore, and thinking about the age of climate change, it comes to mind that what we need to be considering is, first and foremost, what does climate change mean for our natural resources sector, oil and gas and other minerals? But also, what does climate change mean for some of the historical issues that have to do with our governance, which I'll talk about shortly. So we know that minerals can transform economies, and that was the hope for Africa. Every single country, when minerals are discovered, there is a joy, there is a rejoicing, because it is felt that that is going to be transformative for the economy. It is going to lead to growth, economic growth, that can power overall transformation in that particular country's development pathway. However, we know that in truth, that has not been the case. It is not because we are not producing, but there have been some structural as well as governance challenges that have been problematic for Africa. So usually we'll find that across the board for most of our economies, they have not transformed. There has not been economic transformation in the way that we would have expected it to be, or in the way that we would have hoped it would be. Some of the challenges: diversification of economies. A lot of the economies that rely on minerals resources still rely primarily on mineral resources. Whereas if you look at some of the documents across the continent, the idea, the vision is that minerals will transform the economy. While it will be a jumpstart to the economy, the hope always was that minerals will transform the economy and that will diversify into other areas of development and be part of the service and the knowledge economy that drives the world. The other significant challenge we have is around beneficiation. In other words, not only is minerals still the main source of our economy, it is still that we are still in a lot of countries. I know that there are exceptions to this, but in a lot of countries, we are still primarily producing raw materials that we ship out, we export, which then gets developed into final products that are important to us, that we buy at higher values. So while we say that the minerals economy in Africa is huge, and we talk about in billions of dollars, in reality, what we find is that the input-output of that resource to Africa has not always been on the positive side. And a lot of that is linked to governance in terms of how, as African countries, we have dealt with the regulatory framework, the governance framework in our countries. But before I come into here, part of that is also linked to the legacy, something I referred to earlier, the colonial legacy of our sector, in the sense that a lot of the mineral sector was developed not necessarily to benefit African countries. It was developed, it was established, and specifically developed to grow industrial activities externally. And upon independence in a lot of our African countries, unfortunately, we have not been able to transcend that vision of our mineral sector to a place where we begin to see it as, if you like, the powerhouse that transforms the economy into much more less resource intensive sectors, and also that can particularly compete effectively at the global level. But what that also means is that we are very much dependent on the demand for our minerals. That is linked to the wider connectivity and connection within Africa. Till date, it is easier to travel from certain parts of Africa to Europe and North America than within Africa itself, sometimes even within regions. And that kind of colonial legacy has continued in how we perceive and how we regulate our industries here in Africa. So what are some of those challenges that we're talking about? Regulatory gaps. We inherited mining laws, and for decades we kept those mining laws. In Nigeria, for instance, we had our Petroleum Act of 1971, and we've only just recently managed in 1969, we've only just recently in 2023 been able to enact the Petroleum Industry Act that tried to address some of the questions that have been debated for itself, took over 10 years, I think about 14 years to be enacted. So that is a huge challenge. Our mining laws, our oil laws, how relevant are they to our current context? And even with the laws that exist, again, I'm sure we all know this, institutional weaknesses, limited capacity of oversight. So again, you have sectors, the copper belt, where you would have very minimal inspection, very minimal monitoring, where countries sometimes do not even really know how much value of assets is leaving their country. I remember one time when I was involved with the Africa Capacity Building Foundation, looking at natural resources governance in Africa. This was about, I think, 2013, 14, thereabout. One of the case studies that came to the fore was from Tanzania, where, unbeknownst to the government, local people found that mining was being undertaken, earth minerals was being shipped from the shores without the government itself being aware that this was happening, until there was some whistleblowing along with that. In Nigeria, one of the big questions is whether or not Nigeria does know how much of its oil is actually shipped out of the country from any one of its stations. And that problem, that challenge around lack of oversight is also linked to taxation. Because if you are not aware, if you do not know how much of your resources are being developed or have been developed, if you don't know how much it costs to actually develop the resources, so that you have to take the costing of whoever that operator is, and you do not know, therefore, how much value has been created, your taxation mechanisms are also going to be weak and porous. And we have a lot of examples where that porosity has been utilized as a weak spot for some of these companies to undermine the actual amount of tax that they need to pay within countries. And then we have the contractual imbalances. Of course, we know that a lot of our mineral resources, the contracts last for ages. And a lot of these contracts were entered into within the framework of the global foreign investment framework, where investments are the focus of protection. So we know that under our foreign investment laws, all of our countries enter into these agreements. Now, the structure itself is imbalanced in the sense that the focus is on protecting investors and ensuring that investors can get their resources or their investment out of the countries in which they have invested, and to ensure that things like expropriation, things like fair and equitable treatment, all of those are recognized as part of the framework. However, when it comes to the impact of the operations, the environmental impact, the social impact, there is no protection under international law, foreign investment law for that. Be that as it may, we may then argue that, well, it's a contract, and if a contract is breached, then the contract itself provides some form of protection for these activities. And yet, when we look at our contracts across the board, other than some of the new ones that are beginning to make some inroads, we find that the environmental social consequences are not necessarily incorporated into our mining contracts. Again, there are some developments here. I know that some new agreements are being signed, but on the whole, those are still happening within Africa. So, for instance, one of the big examples we talk about from Nigeria is the Nigeria-Moroccan agreement. But how many big Moroccan mining industries or oil industries are in Nigeria? None. So there is that, if you like, gap in our system where we rely on the protection of the investor. It's meant to be two ways, but we know that we do not invest elsewhere. They invest in our countries, and we are not able necessarily to protect our own interests because of the rules that govern that space. Then, of course, we have rules, we have laws that provide for environmental protection, social protections in some form or the other. They may not be the strongest, but across the board, across all the laws I've looked at, most countries have some of these provisions. We then have weak monitoring. Weak monitoring in the sense that we really do not know how much pollution is occurring in our air. If we ask any of our countries to provide for us our air quality samples, it's going to be challenging. If we say provide for us water quality reports, we are not going to have that. The data just does not exist. And so we are limited to individual small studies that look at what the impact of these operations will be in a particular area. And if we ever goes to court, which you lawyers would know, it is effectively challenged by the multinationals who come up with much better science experts who can provide scientific analysis that sort of seems to contradict the smaller studies that lawyers who are involved in this space rely on. Now, from 2019 to 2023, I was involved in a project in Nigeria looking at oil pollution in a particular state, Bayelsa, which led to the publication of our report that we called Environmental Genocide. Environmental genocide. And why did we do that? We did that because looking at the evidence that was before us, we did this work for over 4 years. We went to every single local government area in that state. We spoke to people, we took evidence, and then we took blood samples, we took soil samples, we took plant samples. We looked at analysis of the infrastructure around oil. And what we found was that it was dated. Some of them were older than 40 years old, much past their sell-by date. And yet, if you look at the litigation arm of that, a lot of the time, what you find is that when cases get brought to court for oil pollution, the companies will argue sabotage. In other words, it is not due to equipment failure or instrumental failure. It is that somebody has interfered with the pipeline, and that is the reason why this is happening. But maybe that may be the case. Perhaps, is it easier because that pipeline has been there for so many years, and therefore it is easier to interfere with? Or have you provided the adequate security? Again, basic common law. We all did the law of nuisance. If you bring something into your land, it is likely to cause harm, and if it does cause harm, all of that. Rylance and Fletcher, basic nuisance provision. But these are not effectively challenged in the court. So what you find is that across the board, in a lot of African countries, there is very little litigation, effective litigation, either around the environmental impacts or the social impacts, or indeed, even questions around taxation. Very little of that, of course. We then go to our regional courts or our regional human rights institution. Oftentimes, for instance, the African Commission has given some decisions that seem to support the fact that there is some imbalance here that needs to be remedied. But how do those get enforced, again, at the domestic level? Very, very challenging, because it does not have teeth. The ECOWAS court, for instance, gave a judgment against Nigeria. Till date, nothing has happened as far as that judgment is concerned. And as we look at all of these questions, climate change, as I said, steps in. Now, climate change poses severe risks for Africa, not because we are contributory to the overall causes of climate change. Africa only contributes about 5% of global emission to climate change. So our contribution is quite insignificant. However, the impact of climate change on Africa can be quite significant in the sense that it has implications for our economic sector. In other words, there's a huge outcry now for transition to net zero. If there is a transition to net zero, what happens to petrol states? What happens to minerals within our countries that are also implicated? What is the strategy that we are undertaking to ensure that we are robust and that we are resilient in the age of climate change? That is also that is the economic aspect. And now that is not to say, because of course I'm an environmental lawyer, I believe in climate change. I believe we need to address climate change. But the question again is about equity. What are the discourses? What are the alignments that we have to bring our voice to the fore? So for instance, in 2015 at Paris, when the new framework was agreed, one of the big issues was around the financial aspect. How do we support countries who are implicated, who are impacted by climate change, who are not as strong as the more developed countries in addressing climate change? There was a lot of voice by small island developing states. When it comes to our countries, under the new framework, under the new system, how do we ensure that we are able to maximize whatever support there may be at the international level and ask for more? Because we have not contributed the most. We have been impacted by the most, by sea level rise, by the increase in temperature that is creating more desertification, and in some places even ruining, in most cases, ruining rainfall patterns. That has implications for our agrarian sectors. So we are significantly implicated in the climate discourse. However, the other part of this discourse is the divestment agenda. And this is happening across the continent. When companies that have polluted for several decades are now in the guise of transitioning to green economies or to green energy, selling off assets to local companies. Across the board, this is seen very much in Africa, and I know that even our Affective Bank is very much involved in supporting investments in this area. For a very long time, African countries have talked about local content and ensuring that we have more local participants in our mineral sector, in our oil sector, for instance. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's actually a good thing, because it will lead to, we hope, technological development within our countries. It will lead to more of the revenue remaining within our countries, or at least being utilized for the benefit of our countries. That is a good thing. However, a lot of these companies are selling their assets without first accounting for how to deal with historical pollution. So if we look at the picture that I have on here, that is a devastated environment from oil pollution. Now, when that asset, when that well, when that lease has been sold to a local company, who is responsible for the decades of pollution in the Copper Belt? Who is responsible for the decades of pollution in the Gold Belts? To address the injustice, the remediation, the cleanup that is necessary to restore that environment. That is a big question for Africa and African countries. Unfortunately, governments are signing on to these asset sales without necessarily understanding, or perhaps understanding, but not taking into account how these problems will be resolved. So again, I go back to my country, Nigeria. Shell is the biggest producer. Shell decided to sell its assets to Renaissance, a company that is Nigerian. However, the new company, Renaissance, is more or less Shell Nigeria. Shell actually gave 75% of the cost of the sale, but loaned that to Renaissance for Renaissance to buy the asset from itself. You know what? Shell is to a company to buy an asset and keep that asset. But beyond that,
hi, Prof. Vanessa. Sorry to stop you. I'll ask if you could please just try
finish in 2 minutes, in 1 minute. Okay, I'll do that. Apologies.
much.
Yeah. So for me, those are some of the challenges, but then there are opportunities in the new green economy. So while climate change provides challenges, it also creates new opportunities for industrial, for digital money, for regional framework, because a lot of the green minerals that are required for renewable energy or renewable systems are also in Africa. And our strategy for achieving that, for doing that, is also really, really significant as we move forward. So I think I'll stop there. Again, I apologize for the mix-up, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Prof. Mese. We really appreciate. Sorry.
Yeah, I was thanking her to just before you take the floor for concluding, maybe. Thank you very much, Professor, for your insightful presentation. Your reflection have truly illuminating the complex legal landscape surrounding the natural resources, especially in the climate change in Africa. In the context of climate change. To deepen this, I think that maybe there will be some key leading questions that participant may be asked to you. And I hand back the floor to the moderator, Samantha, just for conducting and moderating those sessions.
Thank you very much, Advocate Claude. Again, thank you very much, Prof. Mese, and a huge apology to everyone for the extension. We had not planned for this, but we truly appreciate your grace and resilience in staying with us for this important discussion. I will just ask if we could have one or two very, very brief questions so that we can wrap up this as soon as possible. We thought it would be unfair to just wrap up without engaging with the audience, but we'll ask for very, very brief, either a question or a comment, two of them, and we'll wrap up definitely. So if you do want to speak, please raise your hand and I'll call you on to speak. I do not see hands. Maybe I'll look at the chat box, but I'm seeing comments from the chat box. But one says the issues around dispute settlement is linked to the way the developed Western countries who have a lead role in financing of extractive industries projects view institutions of African states. Our institutions are generally undermined and made untrustworthy across media and political debates. Thus, we should start by reforming our institutions and devise plans to protect their reputation. Indeed. And Chaboho says governance challenges by Prof is exactly what Ranga touched on. I have less than 2 hours. Oh, okay. So he's excusing himself, but he's really appreciative of this discussion, as we all are. Thank you very much, Prof, for that very detailed presentation. Yes, and before we had a couple of discussions that went through, and we were really aided by Advocate Claude, as well as Ranga, as well as Don. But we thank you for making time for this very important discussion, and we thank everyone again for making time for this very important discussion. I will now hand over to Ranga, who will give the closing remarks, and we'll wrap this up. Ranga, please come through.
Okay, thank you, Samantha, for the good facilitation. I would like to thank everyone for showing up to deliberate on this important topic. And I would also want to apologize for the mix-up that happened, and that Professor Mese, did not make it on time. She joined late, but we are grateful that finally she joined. And we're also grateful that you, our participants, you waited to hear your presentation. I would also like to appreciate the conversations that we have today. The comments that were made, they are very valuable. Even the questions that have been asked, I think they will go a long way, in assisting us to reflect on how we should improve the governance of our mineral resources, so that we're in a position to derive maximum benefits. Just to mention that we are going to continue with these webinars. This is not the last, but we are going to have a series of them. Also important to highlight is that we do have other committees that also host webinars in different, topics. So we encourage you to check on our social media platforms for upcoming webinars. Otherwise, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your night. Goodbye.
Goodbye.